Now, this story is pretty crazy, and when I say crazy, I mean bad, like terribly bad. Because not only was almost an entire family killed, but government officials and criminals worked together to do it. And although there were so many people who knew and still know the truth, the only people to pay the price have either been chased away or silenced for good. In the chaos of Georgia in the 90s, all of the male family members and their mother were either gunned down or kidnapped and disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. This was the Toradze family from Tbilisi. This case left an indelible mark on both the collective and individual memories of a nation. And people who have been accused of participating in this massacre have still managed to live very public lives. And even if they were eventually caught up in the justice system, they managed to go untouched about this particular atrocity. Why is that? How could murders be committed in broad daylight with plenty of eyewitnesses, but the case just can't be solved? Why didn't the warning given by the president not produce a strong force able to combat this anarchy and pervasive wickedness that steadily creeped and devoured the people? And what are the lessons to be learned from this? This period of time was not Georgia's finest moment. In fact, it was very bleak. To get a better picture of just how chaotic Georgia was at this time, you can watch my other videos in this series. It's linked in the description. It was during this time where literally no one was safe. Whether you've known people all your lives or they were in official uniforms, you never knew who you could trust. The bullets would be fired when it came down to pride and power. Known criminals held leadership positions, and justice was based on feelings. People were just hoping to survive, and there was a battle going on somewhere in the country at all times. And the older Toradze brothers were caught up in this turmoil. And though they had many warnings and opportunities to escape, they refused on the grounds of their honor, confident even at one point that death would not be the end result. But they were wrong. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. Now, it's important that I preface this by acknowledging the nature of these accounts. This is largely oral history. There's a lot of he said, she said, and a lot of these claims aren't supported by verifiable evidence. However, this does not mean that any claim without proof is untrue. And it also doesn't mean that anything touted as proof actually is true. All I can do is relay what has been relayed. But regardless, this will always be a tragedy. One of the Toradze sisters, Tamar Toradze, is the primary source for much of this information. She was 13 at the time when she witnessed two of her brothers get gunned down in front of her. So we'll start the story at the point she identifies as the genesis of this escalatory conflict and break this story down into 4 major moments. And just to let you all know, I am suffering with allergies right now, so my voice is a bit off, but we're going to make it through. In the summer of 1991, some guy called Imedo, one of the Toradze brothers, out of the house, and this is when the first serious attack on the family occurred. His elder brother, Kaha, followed behind him. When Imedo made it outside, the guy shot him in the shoulder, and Kaha chased him down. He injured the guy in his leg, but the guy managed to get away. And although the brothers did have weapons, I wasn't able to determine if the injury to the man's leg was due to a gun or, what happened. And although Imedo was clearly injured when he wasn't before, the brothers still didn't tell their mother, Iso, or their father, Zaur, what happened. But of course, parents are parents and they will press an issue. And the guy that shot Imedo just so happened to leave his car behind and take someone else's car to escape. So Father Toradze got the details of the car and found out that it actually belonged to a police officer. This in and of itself is concerning, but due to Father Toradze's job, it was even more unsettling. You see, Father Toradze was actually a government official at the time, working as a deputy minister in the trading department. And according to Tamar, he was an upstanding man who didn't take bribes from anyone. And this made him both friends and enemies, since bribes were common at the time. And soon after the shooting, various law enforcement groups started appearing around the home. However, Tamar says that the Massacre weren't really a part of this at the time since they didn't have power just yet. And you can watch or read my last story on the Tbilisi Civil War to understand why that's the case. At the time, Zviagam Sakuria was the president, but he was out of the country. Tamar reported that her father had said that they, likely government officials, were trying to do something illegal while Zviad was out of the country. When he took Imedo to the hospital, people came by the house and started taunting the siblings, saying that their brothers were shot like pigs. Tamar kept the door closed and told the people in fear, come back when the adults are here. Father Toradze ended up arranging a meeting with the chief prosecutor Boris Ivanov, who was influential at the time. And so Ivanov came to the house, had the meeting, apologized for what happened, and told the police to behave themselves, apparently. In September 1991, Tamar recounted seeing her brothers come home visibly anxious, which wasn't like them. They told the younger siblings to go inside the house because they were playing outside. And it was then that they actually spoke to their father. They told them how they had been traveling down Kalandadze Street when members of the Boratebi gang had stopped them. And Boratebi actually means the evils in English. So there's that. Crazy. These gang members were older than the brothers and told them that they had been bothering one of their people. In one of these recordings, the brothers said that these gang members had told them that they didn't really care about the guy either way, but stop bothering him. And of course, the brothers refused. And bothering could mean like taking money, collecting money, taking stuff from somebody, etc. At this moment, Tamar said that before they could actually converse about it, one of the gang members named Liri Sulabaridze had punched Imedo in the face. Then Lasha hit Liri, and they just, all hell broke loose. However, when shooting started, everyone dispersed. After this, Beto Kartsivadze, along with another guy, visited the Toradze brothers, telling them that they were right and that they would arrange a meeting in which they had to be unarmed and, try to settle this matter. Now, Beto actually knew the Toradze brothers personally, and he was the godson of a very powerful and well-known thief-in-law named Paata Chlaite, aka Big Paata. I'll do an entire series on the thieves-in-law, so be sure to subscribe so you can know when that's coming out. Okay. One of the thieves' approach to conflict resolution is to have meetings. And at this meeting, a thief will act as a mediator and judge in the matter. The losing party is expected to just accept the judgment and the consequence and move on from it. Now, let's be straight. The brothers, Toradze brothers, they were in the streets, so they knew how things went. They were doing what their father did not want them to do. One of the stipulations that Beto gave them was to come unarmed. Then Imedo had called Beto again at some point to confirm that they really should not be bringing any weapons, to which Beto apparently became offended at the confirmation request. Father Toradze, worried about all of this chaos, begged them not to go. However, they refused to listen to him, saying that he was afraid and that nothing was going to happen. But their dad just kept reiterating that this wasn't a normal street dispute, that this was happening at multiple high levels. He kept urging the brothers to just stop it, to stop carrying weapons, and insisted that the family had no other recourse than to leave the country. But since the brothers refused to listen to their father, they settled on an agreement that some of the brothers would not go to the meeting, so that, according to Tamar, all of the brothers wouldn't die at the same time. So the brothers Zaza, Imedo, and their friend Zviad Galovani went. They met Beto at the predetermined meeting point, and then Beto said, let's go back to my flat. This is going to be a calm sort of occasion. But when they got there, around 30 men with machine guns came out of the home, beat the boys, and kidnapped them, and took them toward the Skinetti region. It was there that they tried to force a humbling and an apology for what had happened on Kalandadze Street. But of course, they were not going to apologize, so they were shot in the legs. Apparently, Georgi Ramishvili started shooting the brothers' cars, and the group ended up taking the radio, which was expensive at the time, out of the boys' car. After their unsuccessful attempt at getting an apology out of these boys, they ended up taking their car and leaving them to fight for their own lives. Out of all three of them, Zaza was the one who was able to, was mostly mobile. So he mustered enough strength to go looking for help, and just by chance came across a passerby who helped them, so they were able to get to the hospital. And when Father Toradze received word of what happened, he went and got the boys and brought them home. During this time, other gangsters came by the home telling the brothers how they were right and how what had happened to them was so wrong and unjust. Tamar said that she still didn't know if these people were enemies of her brothers or enemies of her father, or both. But the situation was so bad that even Father Toradze, who didn't like guns, started throwing out the idea that maybe they should join an armed group like the Massacre, but that didn't happen. Brothers moved more and more into themselves and just wanted to stay home, and the prospect of reconciliation pretty much evaporated from their minds. But even with all that had already occurred, the brothers seemingly severely underestimated, the lengths that their enemies would go to dominate them. And moreover, they didn't actually fully know who their enemy was. So they set out to find the answer. The brothers found out that the leader of the Board's heavy gang was someone named Kalandadze, and they set out to kidnap him and confront him to get the answer they wanted, which created yet another situation. The brothers and their friends found out where he lived and they attempted a stakeout, but they were spotted and a shootout ensued. Some of them made it to the hospital, but some didn't. And in all of this, no one knew where Imedo was until the next morning when he phoned and let them know that he was at a friend's house. And at the time, there was a curfew in the city, so if you were out past a certain point, you were liable to get shot. But a mother is a mother. Her boys were in the hospital, so Mother Toradze risked being shot to get there. Though the Toradze brothers survived, one of their friends unfortunately lost his life. He was found dead in the street due to blood loss, and his parents incessantly called the Toradzes, blaming them for their son's death. And Tamar reported that it was so heartbreaking that her parents, or her mother maybe, had even wished that she had lost one of her sons to make up for this. Their other friend Viad was wounded during this and recovering at home when Georgi Rura, aka Zhorika, showed up at his home and at gunpoint made him reconcile with him. Then Viad wanted to come over to the Toradze brothers' house, but they refused, as to try to protect him and at least let him stay in the good graces of Rura. Tamar says that this probably saved Viad's life. The police came to interview them, but it was simply a formality, and the brothers were not going to give up any information that they did have about who their enemy was and about this war going on. And throughout this ordeal, the thief-in-law, Big Paata, had made at least 4 visits to the Toradzes. Tamar recorded one of their last conversations, which is readily available online. In the recording, Big Paata is trying to convince the brothers Kaha and Imedo to have a meeting with their enemies to fix this situation, because he knew that death was coming. He told the brothers that they were smart, they were young, they had a future, but that their enemies were strong and vicious. But even with this urging by a well-respected criminal, the brothers refused to have the meeting and said there was no way that they could reconcile with their enemies. They even went as far as to say that they were ashamed to have them as enemies because they weren't real men. Big Paata, frustrated with the Toradze brothers' pride, but also having genuine concern for them, knowing that they didn't understand the full magnitude of what they were dealing with, told them that whoever kills first, whichever side, they were going to have a problem with him, and that once the first caskets start popping up in the houses, there would be no turning back. And all the while, Father Toradze kept foreboding the family's demise. He said that the family was now on a blacklist, as they didn't want him to give the information that he had on them to Edward Shevardnadze, who was on his way back to Georgia. Now, whether the conflict was tied to Father Toradze, his sons, or both of them, his worst fear was closer to happening than probably any of them realized. March 3rd, 1992 was the day that changed everything. Zaza was actually at his wife's house recovering. Meanwhile, Lasha's doctor had called the family and told them that it was best to bring Lasha into the hospital to have his dressings for his wound changed versus doing one at home. So Mother and Father Toradze took Lasha to the hospital as normal. But on their way back home, there was a shootout that lasted about 10 to 15 minutes. Word came back to the siblings that were home that some people were shot and killed near Vera Cemetery with the license plate number 111107, Father Toradze's plate number. 3 members of the family had now been executed. Upon hearing this, Kaha attempted to run out of the home but was stopped by neighbors who told them to prepare the home so that they could bring the bodies in. But then they saw tanks and armed people starting to surround the block. Tanks in a residential neighborhood. Being the eldest sibling there, Kaha instructed his younger siblings, Tamar, the little sisters, and the youngest Toradze brother, Paata, who had nothing to do with the conflict, to go hide out in the bathroom because it had no window. But then when they tried to leave the building again, another neighbor stopped them, telling them that they couldn't go outside and to go hide in her 7th floor apartment, which didn't lock. So they ended up hiding out in another neighbor named Tamrico's apartment. And she had 2 little kids about ages 2 and 4. Tamar recounts that Kaha was calling people, including people in Russia, and him and Imedo would have their own conversations and pray intermittently. As they hid, people ransacked the family's apartment and cleared the building of other people. The armed individuals that came to the apartment ended up at points pointing their guns at the police who were also there, when the police had said, hey, this should be an arrest, not a killing. And they told them to stay out of it. Another neighbor had taken the Toradze brothers' weapons and hid them because there was some idea that maybe they were coming to arrest one of the brothers or both, for the weapons or whatever they were coming to arrest them for. And one neighbor repeatedly kept saying that she could organize an escape for them, but the brothers refused. Their neighbor who was hiding them in her apartment even said that she could make space under the mattress for the brothers to hide. But again, they refused. And honestly, I don't know why. The gunmen eventually made their way to the 7th floor apartment and threatened the people with grenades and to kill everybody if they didn't open up the door. So Kaha made a fateful decision. He told the neighbor to open the door. The neighbor tried to get the brothers to hold her 2 little children to try to, I guess, appeal to their humanity that they wouldn't shoot kids. But the brothers refused to do that, saying they were not going to use little children as shields. It was honorable. Paata was hidden under the sofa, and the sisters sat on top of the sofa to further shield him. When the gunman asked where the Toradze brothers were through the door, the neighbor said, put the guns down, there are little kids in here. And then they were let in. When the gunmen were inside, the brothers announced that they were present and unarmed, but that didn't matter. As Kaha tried to shield Imedo, Tamar says that Jorika and his accomplice had simply opened fire on the brothers, even with them exclaiming that they were unarmed. After slaying them, Jorika took out a handgun and pointed it around the room looking for other males. And when he saw that there weren't any, he turned the handgun back on the brothers and fired off a few more shots into their already dead bodies. Then they left, shooting out what was interpreted as perhaps celebratory shots. Paata came out of hiding and cried beside Imedo's body, closing his eyes. And a neighbor, Tamara, was shot in the leg when she was caught in the crossfire. After the shooting, lots of people began gathering around the apartments, and eventually they got inside. And Tamar reports that someone named Goga Z came in with a machine gun, telling them not to cry for their brothers because their parents didn't raise them right. One of the men took Paata to the bathroom and put a gun to his head, in which someone had to intervene, saying, what are we doing here? This is a kid. You're not going to just kill a kid. Additionally, Gelalan Shava, a military officer, was reported by multiple witnesses as having been the one responsible for bringing the tank into the neighborhood. And Tamar says that he had said, in regards to the executions, that this is what happens when you're a Zviadist, a supporter of then-president Zviad Gamsakudia, who had literally just been overthrown. Again, that is in my Tbilisi Civil War video if you want to hear about that. But side note, Gela had actually, apparently, offered help to Lasha at one point after the shootout with the Borotebi where their friend was killed. And as it turns out, that friend happened to be a close relative of Gela. But the brothers didn't give up the identities of the shooters, though Gela was asking for it. Remember, they never actually knew who the enemies were and were not. And they didn't know the extent of this whole organization. Separately, later on, Jorika was accused by Tamar and another woman named Maya Vepkvadze of being the leader of yet another neighborhood gang named Verisadsmo, which was supported by Jaba Ioseliani, founder of the Mekhedrioni. This woman was the sister of a Mekhedrioni member named Toradze. She claimed years later on social media that Rura, aka Jorika, was responsible for the deaths of her brother and 19-year-old son. The overlap in volume of all of these different groups working together and against each other made it extraordinarily unclear and perhaps impossible to understand who was an enemy and who wasn't. But back to the apartment though. The entire scene was chaotic and moving fast. Tamar said that a guy with black eyes came into the apartment and asked them if they knew who had killed the brothers. But they didn't tell him, because the brothers' friends had apparently already been there and told the siblings, act dumb. You don't know anything. Don't say anything. Don't even cry. So they didn't tell anybody anything. And they didn't tell him where their oldest sibling Zaza was. But when they were allowed back into their family's apartment, they saw that it had been looted. Even still, Gayla, a grown man, made Tamar sign a paper saying that nothing had been taken. Remember, she was 13 at the time, and he was a military officer. This incident made headlines throughout the country for how gruesome it was. But even a newspaper article preserved by Tamar well into the 2000s reported that the brothers had been involved in a murder or had murdered a member of the SanJaunYT, and this might be the name that I saw pop up, named Kote Bibalari. Tamar said they had even brought weapons to the home to try to prove this, but that's the nature of he said, she said. With the parents gone, the young siblings couch surfed for a bit and then eventually returned to the apartment. But even with the kids having witnessed this tragedy and having lost their parents, the brutality and cruelty just did not stop. At the apartment, the siblings were receiving calls from people who were telling them that they were going to come there and throw their dead family members out of the window. Separately, friends of the brothers were being approached by these people and intimidated into becoming informants. Some of them broke, some didn't. But eventually, Zaza was located and he disappeared. To this day, it's unknown where he was taken and if he was killed. And later on, a relative of theirs had informed the family that she had overheard some people talking in the Mateki Hotel, saying that it was time to take care of little Paata because he was getting older and may take revenge. They believed that these people may have been members of Borotebi. And in February, 2 years after the massacre, Paata and his friend were picked up on their way to school by people in a regular car. Their IDs were checked and they were kidnapped. The kidnappers radioed other people and were given coded instructions, one of which was, let the pawn go and keep the figure. They covered Paata's eyes and released his friend, telling him not to look back. And just like his oldest brother, this Toradze brother disappeared, never to be seen again. I'm not sure what happened with the other sisters, but Tamar says that she eventually sought refuge in a monastery because there were talks brewing of trying to get her. But then she eventually got married, and at that point, these people started laying off her. She eventually obtained U.S. citizenship where she currently lives. But this isn't the end of the story though. Jorika ended up getting into another opposing political party and founded an oppositional channel in Georgia that has since shut down, named Metavariarchy TV. He was arrested a couple times, but the last time was that we're talking about now was for an illegal firearms charge in Georgia. And halfway around the world, the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee issued a statement condemning Georgia, the ruling Georgian political party, for raiding the United National Movement, which was an opposing political party that Giorgi Rura or Jorika was a part of. And they called for the release of all political prisoners and explicitly called for the release of Giorgi Rura. In response to this, Tamar issued a public letter, an open letter, to U.S. Senator Jim Risch detailing what happened to her family, the role that Rura had played in it, asked for help with the case, and unequivocally requested that he not be referred to as a political prisoner. The Georgian prosecutor's office ended up formally asking the U.S. for help with their investigation, but over the years, nothing has come of it. Additionally, I managed to find some records that Giorgi Ramishvili, the guy who reportedly shot up their car and was a part of the kidnapping, he ended up becoming very rich and filed a lawsuit against Tamar, and she submitted a counterclaim. But I really don't know the details of it or what has come of it or anything like that. Lastly, another crazy detail is that Tamar said that the man who had put a gun to Little Pod's head in the bathroom that day ended up becoming a soccer coach for children. And remember the start of the problems with the brothers when they were accused of bothering someone? There's a claim floating around that this bothering of someone had to do with them taking a jacket of some sort off of this person. So there's that. This situation is tragic for so many different reasons. One of them being that these kinds of things were not unusual at the time. You see, Georgia was experiencing a never-ending nightmare just having had a bloody civil war just a couple months before. Death was commonplace at this time. You wake up, have breakfast and small talk with your friend or family member, and by the evening you get word back that their blood has been spilled. Yet the people who allegedly committed these crimes were still able to attain high levels of success and live public, free lives without ever being held accountable for what they did. In fact, they even garnered supporters for other reasons who don't seem to have taken into consideration that what had happened to this family could have easily happened to them. The Toradze family massacre is an example of not only just the levels of evil that people can go to, but the danger of pride. Furthermore, it's an unfortunate example of what can happen when a people are divided and there's an exchange of integrity for power. And lastly, this story supports the idea that officiality does not automatically mean truth and justice. Whatever the truth may be, there's no doubt that this is a tragic story. Still, Tamar was able to make a life for herself. And although possibly the greatest tragedy of her life occurred in Georgia, she was able to return years later and felt a wonderful shift in the atmosphere from the Georgia that she grew up in the 90s. She also ended up writing a book about this, but unfortunately I wasn't able to locate the English copy to buy or get in contact with her. Regardless, it's amazing that she was able to speak life even after experiencing death. I hope you all found value in this. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have any more information or insight. I will also be starting a new series, but I want your suggestions. So if you have any suggestions for a series that you would like to see about the Caucasus, it does not have to be heavy hitters like this. This is very emotionally heavy for me. It can be anything: food, dance, culture. It can be other like wars. I'm definitely doing one on the thieves-in-law. So like I said, subscribe and be ready for that. You can also visit my website if you want to actually just read the research instead of like watching it. But let me know what series you all want to see. We can make it happen. All right, peace.